Welcome to our monthly LabVine webinar, where thought leaders and subject matter experts share their knowledge and topics of interest with laboratory professionals globally. I am Victoria Curry, the digital marketing specialist for LabVine, and today we listen to Dr. Rodney Rode, who will be doing a presentation titled Be the Expert, a Pandemic Opportunity. Everyone attending this event will receive a certificate of attendance if you are signed up to LabVine. If you are not a LabVine member yet, don't worry. After my short talk here, I will pop the link in the chat so you can sign up for free. Please note that the recording and the certificate will be sent to you via email within the next 5 business days, which will be on the 10th of August. Should you have any questions you would like answered, please post them in the Q&A section, and we will attend to the questions at the end of the session, where Dr. Rodney will answer all the questions that are posted there. Otherwise, you are more than welcome to participate in any conversation in the chat box. I now hand over to our speaker, Rodney. Go for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. Good morning, LabVine audience. It is a pleasure and an honor to join you today to speak about something that I'm very passionate about. And that topic, as Victoria said, was really talking about subject matter expertise. And I'm going to get into the nuts and bolts of what I think are really critical and important with respect to, how do you get there? How do you get to that point of what you might consider being a subject matter expertise? It certainly doesn't happen overnight. And so I'm going to give you a little background of kind of my story and my journey. And I will mention off the bat here that this is not just because of the pandemic. This is something I've been building on for 30 plus years. And I always kind of use the analogy of some people, will mention to me that, how did this happen overnight for you? And I kind of laugh because that's how musicians or actors sometimes are looked at. How did you become so prominent in this area overnight? And really, it's decades sometimes of building that reputation and moving to this point. So I'll get into that a little bit today. Here are the primary learning objectives for you. So I hope that when we're finished today, that you will have some idea of how to leverage your medical laboratory expertise. And that can be in any area, any specialty, right? So I'm primarily an infectious disease clinical microbiologist in all areas of microbiology, but as well as public health and some other areas of the medical laboratory advocacy areas. And I would also hope that you can identify some effective strategies, not only to work towards subject matter expertise, but start to synergize how you do that in different digital and social media channels. And I'm not going to totally just focus on social media. That's obviously become a big part of our world, but it's still critical to think about traditional types of media and interviews and email and effective websites and things like that. So I'll talk a little bit about that. And then one more thing I hope to leave you with today is a little bit of a how-to create an explainer article. So if you've never heard of an explainer article, it's become very important in the world of science communication and health literacy to help combat misinformation and sometimes outright lies and falsehoods. So that's my big 3 today. And you might also have some other tips and nuggets that I drop in as we go. So typically I'm doing this sometimes in a live audience. So perhaps you can drop this into the chat and I can look at it as we move through the talk and get to the Q&A later. But I'm kind of curious about what you guys think is a subject matter expert, kind of what that definition is in your mind, maybe how people are viewed. Why would you think someone is a subject matter expert? Is there something that in your mind defines that for you? So if you might drop that in the chat, and Victoria and I can take a peek at that later.
Yeah, Rodney, I will read out if anything does come through. So far, we still have people joining. So if something comes through, I'll let you know as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Victoria. Okay, so first off, let's talk about how we kind of start this process. And it's obviously rare, if ever, that someone's born an expert in any particular area. So this is kind of what I was mentioning earlier. It really is a process and it takes time. And so a lot of that has to do with your education and your experience and your environment that you're surrounded with. But certainly as you build a passion and perhaps the intellect for a particular area, and this desire for continuous learning, which everyone in the healthcare and medical laboratory research field, and really a lot of fields, hopefully have that desire for a lifelong learning experience. Then you can start reaching that SME, or that subject matter expert role. The benefits of working towards this is that, and again, I think most of you know this, it doesn't only just increase your personal value, but it really can bolster the reputation and the ability of your profession and even your business and market for the general public. So it becomes an asset for not only yourself, but also others around you in your profession. So what do we do? What is it and what do we do? It's really someone who has a very deep knowledge of a specific process, function, or technology. This is just a straight definition. And many times it's a combination of all three of those. And I mention this because when in my bio, and when I talk about what I can speak to or be interviewed about, the big umbrella, kind of the 10,000-foot view, just as an example for me, would be public health / medical laboratory, especially infectious disease. That's kind of my big umbrella. But there's so many slants and avenues to kind of explore in that area, is that certainly it can be a combination of different areas. So there is a narrow kind of thought around subject matter expertise, but there are broader areas that many people are expert in, especially with time and years as they pass over. You are typically considered an authority on a topic, and that's really important. For example, I've done a ton of work throughout my career in rabies and zoonotic disease. And so many times I am consulted or specifically sought out by not only patients, but physicians, government leaders, policymakers, people that want to know the latest updates on rabies diagnostics or prevention with vaccines, treatment and therapies. And so you're considered that authority. And so once you establish that, part of your goal is to be available to some of those types of entities so that you can share that knowledge. And it's really important, again, to not only you, but to your organizations, because it does help you kind of establish a competitive edge, kind of a visibility and awareness for not only yourself, but you're really raising the profession of all those around you who work in these areas. So I'm going to give you a quick article. I'm going to give you something that, interestingly, and you'll see this, you see on this slide, notice the date of this article. So one of the things that I was doing prior to the COVID-19 pandemic was building my subject matter expertise. And so I've been doing a lot of continuing education and specific work in science communication and in communication in general. And so I was looking over this article that I had found. And interestingly, again, this was October of 19, and I had been watching, I subscribed to multiple disease outbreak, kind of a radar of what's happening globally. And I was already seeing the first reports, of this suspicious respiratory illness in certain parts of the world, especially Wuhan. And so nobody really knew exactly when that was going to blow up, but I was already seeing the first cases, and I was looking at these articles and really fine-tuning my subject matter expertise. So here's the link, and I'm going to walk through the high points of this article just to set the foundation today. So you got to start somewhere, right? And so for me, that was primarily education. So all of my degrees, I've got a bachelor's and a master's in microbiology and virology, the study of viruses, respectively. And then I left education and worked for a decade in the Department of Public Health in Austin, Texas, and was a visiting scientist for 2 or 3 times with CDC in Atlanta to develop really cutting edge rabies and other zoonotic disease tools for diagnostics. So really the cutting of my teeth and experiential learning was for about a decade in that area. It was the most fantastic time of my early career. I got to work with amazing experts and really develop some tools, some of the first research tools and diagnostic tools for rabies and arboviruses. So that education experience piece there for me was critical it really established a foundation of knowledge. And I'll speak more to that later. And then just your ability to read and continue to learn in that area, whether that's CE or taking more classes. I didn't do my PhD until I was about 36, 37, after I'd come back to academia. So I came back to Texas State in 2002. I've been here 21 years now. And after about 4 years is when I stepped into my PhD. And I developed what I often call a hybrid background. So the first 2 degrees were all science, hardcore science. My PhD was really about adult learning, public health education, experiential learning, how to deliver content effectively to the public and to your peers. And so you can see how those 2 areas kind of merge well for what I'm trying to do in my life at this stage, delivering information and science communication. So that CE can continue. This is the second big point from that article. You probably know most of these with respect to professional conferences, going to different talks and listening to experts in the field. Social media has a place for current things going on in your area, whether it's whatever social media platform you're on. Industry publications, wonderful tools to think about cutting edge diagnostics or therapies. Again, education. Sometimes it's important to think about returning for formal education maybe later. I often recommend this to students that I teach because sometimes it's nice to go get some experience in an area, say medical laboratory or public health, and then after 5, 10 years or 3, whatever it's going to be, maybe you fall in love with hematology or blood banking. And that's when you really will be the most effective learner, is when you go back for a graduate degree in that area, because you are emboldened and passionate about that field, and you're going to learn and read and consume everything you can because you want to learn that. And then nothing replaces experience. So working experience and all sorts of roles will continue to help educate you as you move through your career. Here's one that's not as easy for some people, and I would say this is kind of the transition period career-wise for people, is starting to believe in yourself and trying out some of your own ideas. So as you immerse yourself in your subject area, start testing them out with trusted colleagues and other experts. Talk about what you think might be an interesting slant or topic, and even practice them or kind of daydream or think about how you might use these in whether it's in a social media space, a blog, maybe you become an author for an article, or you work with a mentor, asked to lead or co-lead a project at your place of work. Let's say you're interested in diagnostic stewardship. Ask your hospital or your healthcare entity, can you be part of that committee, determine the best practices for laboratory testing, and then get involved and perhaps lead or co-lead so that people get to understand how passionate you are about those areas. So many people, and I'm sure all of you out there have expertise, and you may not think you have it, but you do, right? I mean, medical laboratory especially, but also other slants in healthcare and research. People sometimes don't realize how much they know and how much their experience is valuable until they start being asked and they start sharing it. Even things that you think are kind of normal, they're not normal for other people in the public. So when you translate that information out into the public, many people don't know what a CBC is, or a clinical gram stain is, or how you identify certain pathogens, or how you determine if you have sickle cell anemia. If you can take that knowledge you have and communicate it in a way that people can understand it, for example, can your grandmother or someone else in your family understand what you do because you can explain it in maybe a less technical way, then you are onto something, and you're gonna be very good at subject matter expertise. Social media has obviously become part of the world, and there's good and bad with this. It cuts both ways. So my first comment here is the same thing I told my children when they were growing up. They're now in their mid-20s. Be careful. Be careful. Don't share things that you don't want your parents to read or your boss to read, because it rarely goes away. Even if you try to take it down, there's someone who might take a quick snippet or snapshot of it and share it later. So be careful. Be careful how you share things. Follow reputable people, right? Follow authorities, use relevant hashtags to keep kind of a pulse on a subject. And we can talk about hashtags later if you'd like. And then leverage it to market your expertise. Exactly what I'm doing today is with LabVine's assistance and them reaching out to me and me being agreeable to the content, I am helping to market how to do this through LabVine, which is a very primary tool for laboratory professionals. So leverage that as you move forward. Don't be afraid to do those things. Here are some of the specifics. Again, most of you have heard of these. And if you have some questions later, we can do this offline if you want to connect with me, or you can ask me later. There are ways to start your own blog and podcast. I have a YouTube channel. That's even less invasive. It's not difficult. It's free. You can start your own YouTube channel. Do not underestimate professional organizations and working on committees and sometimes being a leader of those committees so that people get to know you. With your employer, I'm going to speak a lot about this in a moment, but once you're working somewhere and you gain the trust of that entity, let them know that you actually are okay with being contacted by the media. Again, make sure you get approval from your employer, but maybe you're an expert in some particular area and you are fine with talking about malaria or whatever the topic is if an interview or a reporter contacts the hospital or healthcare entity, so that you can start building that skill set of speaking and being interviewed and presenting, and then writing and speaking at every opportunity. Again, I talk to my students about this almost daily, if not weekly, about taking opportunities. I actually embed this in my coursework. They don't like it at first, but they do multiple presentations for my coursework and our other courses in our program. They do multiple writing assignments, and not just research writing, but something called an explainer article, which I'll share with you later about how to do that. Ways to communicate, ways to translate research and thick topics to the public. It's so important that we can share our expertise in ways that the public can understand that. That's the best way to become a subject matter expert. This takes a little time. The next step, becoming a decision maker, you certainly have to kind of make sure the environment and the timing is right for that. Typically, it's not the first week of your job as a new employee, but over years and maybe sooner, depending on the field, working your way through those experts and supervisors and the media market team in your place, and how you can help influence decisions and outcomes in a particular area. And that really, again, starts giving you a competitive edge, as well as what I sometimes call street cred. People actually look at you as a subject matter expert because of your leadership role in your decision making, perhaps your writing and speaking on different areas. Doing the work when it's really hard sometimes helps. And then being genuine is so important. Trying to remain neutral doesn't mean you can't have an opinion, an expert opinion, and get on that side, but being willing to listen to the other side, which is really something I think we've lost in society. Being able to listen and then do an actual debate with people if you can. I know at times you can't do that. People are not going to allow you to do that, but trying to be open to that so that you can be that person who sees both sides and tries to understand that. Usually a true authority on a subject is, you want to be that person. You don't want to be persuaded by goods or services. Be careful how you work with industry and others. Doesn't mean you can't accept honorariums and things like that, but be careful how you're perceived, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Your reputation is so important in this area. And once you slip one way or the other, it's hard to build that back, right? So be careful with your ethics and your integrity and things like that. Okay, so a little bit about me. That was just a foundation of some things about subject matter expert. Check my time here. So I already mentioned my educational journey, but I do want to point out again, as maybe you're still looking at education opportunities or job opportunities, I like to preach, now this is not for everybody, but I believe in hybrid multiple experiences. It will build your repertoire and your platform for expertise. So I mentioned my first kind of slant in my career was the hard sciences, bench level laboratory research. My master's was looking at poliovirus antiviral therapy. My bachelor's was all about clinical microbiology. And then I worked for a decade and really had an amazing experience with rabies control and prevention and diagnostics and other areas in zoonotic disease like plague and hantavirus and things like that. Just an amazing decade, which gave me focus for when I moved into academia in 2002 to pursue other research areas. So I switched to antibiotic resistance, antimicrobial resistance. My father has dealt with MRSA throughout the last decade or so. And so it gave me some personal passion around antimicrobial resistance issues. And so thinking about how you can tie your personal passion with your research and your education can be really helpful to empower your expertise. And the second bullet, again, I know I may be preaching to the choir here, but I often find that students and new professionals don't know how to pursue some of these opportunities. There are so many opportunities with respect to internships, fellowships, even volunteerism, and understanding that you might be at the right place at the right time. When I was first going to work at the Department of Health in Texas, it was 1992, and Texas was undergoing a rabies epizootic, which is an outbreak in animals down in South Texas. And they created, at the time, a really unbelievable team called the Oral Rabies Vaccine Program, where we were to deliver aerially. So we dropped them vaccine from airplanes all over South Texas. And when wildlife like fox and coyotes ate the vaccine, it would erupt a vaccine packet and liquid would run down their throat in their tonsillar region, and it would vaccinate them against rabies. So I did that for 10 years, not only out in the field doing that, but also coming back to the lab and developing the tools with CDC to diagnose rabies and kind of track the outbreak, what variant of rabies was where, so we could drop these baits at the proper places. It was a phenomenal experience. And at the time, I was just in the right place at the right time, but someone asked me, hey, you got a master's in virology. Would you like to jump on board with this project? I could have said no, because it was, I was busy with work and getting married and having children, but I didn't. And it literally changed my life. That one moment in my life, it set the foundation for everything I'm doing now with respect to public health. And it gave me opportunities at CDC. I worked with the Canadian Ministry of Natural Resources, with other European countries. So it opened up my local experience to a global experience. So do not hesitate to volunteer for maybe amazing opportunities to meet people, to network and get to know experts. Look for these opportunities and don't be afraid to jump into them. And then I can't speak enough about ongoing development in your professional organizations. For me, all of these acronyms are different medical laboratory, ASCLS, APHL is public health, ASM is the micro, ASCP is also one of my core medical laboratory professions. And all of these have been just critical for building networks and circles of experts that I can rely on when I need to talk about. So network, and network again, including things outside of your normal expertise where it lines up. So what does that mean? Well, I love infectious disease. So what I've lined up with is I work with infectious disease pharmacy, those who are expert in drug use and development. And you see AHE right here. That's the environmental services and infection prevention community. So people who clean and disinfect healthcare entities in hospitals, people that are tracking outbreaks within a hospital, for example. So those are kind of my areas where I kind of align with infectious diseases, and it's led to multiple opportunities to write, speak, and be interviewed. So for me, I put this up here on purpose because it wasn't the pandemic that really helped me move out of my career. This was certainly a critical piece, this 3 to 4 year period. It helped me amplify and start exploding my expertise with respect to delivering it to the public. But really it started back in 2016, 2015, when I did a TEDx talk because my university hosted a TEDx opportunity. And, I was a little scared, a little leery to do that, but I did it and it went viral. It was about the medical laboratory. It was about MRSA and how we deal with healthcare associated infections. It's on my YouTube channel. And so it really was probably the tipping point for me to really take advantage of my subject matter expertise and share it. I had been doing a few interviews and I've been writing my whole career, but this really brought me into the public eye with respect to how to leverage that understanding. So, it's been a ride and it's still going. And so we'll talk about that. But I just like to mention that because the pandemic was certainly helped me amplify my voice, but it didn't build it. I had been doing that for decades before. Doesn't this make you reflect, this slide? Sometimes I just stop and think about what we've all lived through. I lived through a few of these because back in the 90s and early 2000s, I dealt with anthrax and West Nile virus and other things that have happened throughout our country, but nothing like this. This has been quite a learning experience for many of us. So that leveraging of your expertise becomes important with respect to your credentials. So your education, your licensing, your certification. Mine were known at Texas State. And in Texas, again, because of what I mentioned before, I'd laid that groundwork of the years I'd put into public health and infectious diseases. So you want to continue to build that foundation. And my first big tip of the day, my first pro tip is this third bullet. When about 7 or 8 years ago, so this was prior to the pandemic, but I reminded them during the pandemic that I was a specialist in microbiology and virology, that I had a background of speaking and writing in this area. And I offered to my university to be a point of contact to their university media team. Find out who your media team is, who your marketing team is, and let them know that, hey, I'm John Smith, and I'm really a specialist in hepatitis and all the types of hepatitis and how they're diagnosed and how they're spread, and maybe areas that are outside of that, the medical laboratory in general, and let them know you're happy to answer media questions and be interviewed. And then I'll talk about how to prepare for that. Also, do not be afraid to work synergistically between all the different forms of media, right? So it's not just social media. I would say you can't just be tied to social media for your subject matter expertise or even your advocacy efforts. There are still people that believe in print media, believe it or not. There are still people that use other digital media, podcasting and websites and so forth. Certainly social media is important, but you want to be able to work it synergistically. So what does that mean? If I publish a paper, for example, on biofilms and antimicrobial resistance, then I'm going to refer to that paper when I'm speaking on a podcast. I'm going to ask Victoria for LabVine, would you link to some of my papers that I published so that it's a synergistic opportunity? Does that make sense? So take advantage of the opportunity when it occurs to synergize. And it doesn't even just have to be yours. You could tie it to a professional organization's white paper or some other project that you find important so that it gets multiple opportunities to be seen by the public. And then this last piece here is so important. I cannot emphasize this enough, and I'm going to give credit to my parents, and that is to be sincere, be grateful for the opportunity, thank people. I've even sent handwritten notes to individuals, but certainly thank you emails and phone calls are appropriate. Be prompt in your responses. If you're asked to do something, make sure you follow up. It never hurts to, send a reminder to people, of what's going on and to thank them, and then to offer your expertise over and over again. Gratitude and thank yous are a much needed thing in the world today. And I just can't say how much this has helped my career with respect to reaching out and thanking people, even at later dates, just to remind them of what they did to help build your career. Find effective strategies to synergize that expertise. All right. So you want to stay in your lane. So I'm going to get into some actual points here about speaking to reporters. This could be live interviews. This could be written interviews through email. That happens a lot now. It could be through Zoom, video cast, things like that. So there's all sorts of lanes here. It could be with a television reporter who wants to talk to you and put you on camera. So just some quick points. This is kind of like interviewing. So I talk about this a lot with my students when they're getting jobs too. This comes from Sciline. So I'm just going to mention this because it's someone who helped me. Sciline is available. You can follow Sciline on Twitter. You can follow it elsewhere, but they have some nice resources. And so this was a paper that this individual shared with me about scientists speaking with reporters. So this was early on, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. Generally, you want to ask the reporter what the content area is. You're going to know, right? They're typically going to say, hey, Dr. Odie, we want to know about the current variants of SARS-CoV-2 that are circulating not only in Texas, but perhaps globally. Can you talk to us about that? So it gives you a time period, hopefully, to do some research, right? And it's okay to ask for some time, especially if it's print media or so forth. So write down 3 big points that you want to make. Have them in front of you. It's okay to have something in front of you. Talk about them early in the conversation and repeat them as opportunities arise. And then as you are able, back them up with data and studies. If it's your own data, that's fine, but otherwise use peer-reviewed, reputable data, from certain peer-reviewed publications or places like CDC or the Mayo Clinic or WHO, things that people know about. So you want to be, you're uniquely positioned to inject evidence into the news cycle so that it's not hearsay, so that it's not misinformation. And you want to kind of keep that in mind as you're going through this process. Describe the big picture, right? Even if you're not asked by a reporter, kind of step back and talk about, when people were asking me about variants early on, I was like, no, let's take a step back and think about influenza as an analogy. We get vaccines every year because influenza changes. And it gives you an opportunity to kind of give the big picture about viruses in general. This is not new. Viruses do this. We understand it. It's just that this particular virus is brand new. It's novel. And we have to figure out the best vaccination therapy as we move forward. Explain why addressing it demands a methodical scientific approach. This is your chance to inject evidence and scientific information into the public's mind. And sometimes reporters will push you for answers, but when they do that, you want to do the above before you delve into certain solutions. So you really want to describe the big picture. It also gives you time to think in case someone's asking you persistent questioning that you may not be comfortable with. And that leads to this point. If you disagree with a question, say so. It's actually not rude to do it. Just do it respectfully. For example, if a reporter or someone else says something that is incorrect, just use some kind of phrasing like, that's not quite right. Viruses don't respond to antibiotics. It's a different type of microbe. They have different mechanisms of action and targets of action for drugs. They're very difficult to treat. And so you can kind of take that a different way. Or I don't think your premise is correct. What I see happening is, and go into that conversation. Or, hey, that might be one factor, but really the bigger issue is global antimicrobial resistance. Everybody plays a part in this. And so you can kind of turn the conversation. If you don't know the answer, it's okay to say so, right? So this is a really good habit to learn. I'm sorry, that's actually outside of my area of expertise, right? I don't have the answer at my fingertips. Can I do some research and get back to you on that? And here's one of my favorites to use, especially if you know other experts. You can become synergistic with your friends and colleagues. That isn't something I focus on actually, but Dr. Smith at Vanderbilt might be a good person to talk to. Can I give you his information and contact information? And so you create opportunities within your field instead of handing it off maybe to someone who isn't as expert as they need to be. Some do's and don'ts. This is kind of life do's and don'ts, right? This is from their publication, Sciline. Use analogies, visual examples, and anecdotes. I can't emphasize this enough in the world of misinformation and social media. Use things that the general public kind of understands. If you start diving into deep research and using terms that nobody uses, you've already lost the game, right? You need to find a way to use analogies and pictures in your kind of a visual picture. Don't use a lot of acronyms and jargon. Try to keep it straight. Do ask for clarifying questions so that you make sure you know what you're talking about. Don't go off record. Most reporters don't want you to say that. Make sure you're not, doing that. You might say something like, I'm actually not prepared to talk about that right now. I need to do some research or check with my supervisors or media team, and I'll get back to you. That's better than saying, you know what, let's talk about this offline. I'll give you some information. That could be a dangerous prospect. And then make sure you close the interview by repeating your key points and offering to follow up by email, by doing another interview, what have you. I often do, this number 5 is really my last do's and don'ts. I often do multiple follow-up emails by offering new insight or research that I've come across. So I keep a specific folder in my email log with all the different agencies and reporters and people that I've gotten to know. And I will reach out to them a month later or 6 months later and say, hey, remember that article you did with me on surfaces being important with the spread of viruses? Now research is not showing that for SARS-CoV-2. It's more of a aerosolized-based transmission. Let me share this information with you again. So it re-engages the reporter. And then again, link to other work that you've done or other people. That helps establish a personal connection with a reporter or an entity. They will share it with their colleagues in the reporting area. Again, this is a synergy and a networking type of thing that you build over time. And again, Mom was always right. Thank people over and over again. Show appreciation for their work. I'm so thankful that Victoria has given me this opportunity, and LabVine has given me this opportunity to utilize their platform to talk about something I'm passionate about, science communication, combating misinformation. And so I'm very thankful for that. And I will be following up with them to do other opportunities in this area. So it's just an opportunity to thank people for their help. It's never too late to develop a strong personal web page. If we had a couple of hours today while we talk, I would jump out and show you some of this, but there is my web page. I've actually had I've asked professional web people to kind of edit it and look at it. And so I've developed, a way for the media to find me, not just students and other researchers, but how they can find some of the stories I do. Those social media interactions, again, I'm going to come back to, become important to build this synergy within different social media platforms, but you can always link them back to your web page. It's always nice to have a pot, a reservoir of all your publications and podcasts and specialties that you can go, hey, go check out my website. I've done a whole series on antimicrobial resistance, so they can go back to that. Analytics. So just a couple of comments on analytics. It's really important for you as you get more familiar with social media and digital media to look at metrics and analytics. This shows you during, this is simpler that you do sometimes with Twitter chats, and you can actually see the types of influential, prolific tweeters and highest impressions during particular events. This was a medical laboratory chat back in 2021, and you can see that I was very fortunate to be at the top of that. So it's about engagement, being involved and staying with it for the time period that chat is occurring on Twitter. We can talk about that offline sometimes. These are events that are hosted. They're usually about an hour long. You can even be invited like a panelist to answer questions. They're like prepared questions about different topics. Here's another one during a professional meeting. Again, this is the ASCP national meeting. So often there's a particular hashtag. Ask about it, find out what it is, and use it. Don't just create random hashtags. Everybody does that. I mean, you can do that, but hashtags that are actually registered and utilized are ways to track events historically. You can go back. I can go back and look at hashtag ASCP 2021 and find content if I want to. So some of the examples as we move forward, some examples that have happened. So this is what's kind of fun. You'll find out you'll get different opportunities. So this was really one of the more interesting interviews I did during COVID-19 with the sports world. So this is a lawyer and an NFL veteran who talk about sports at kind of the intersection of all sorts of topics. And they asked me to come on board for a conversation about how COVID was affecting sports. especially football, but others. So these turned into some nice types of opportunities to discuss. This was video. These are basically video podcasts. Here's Lona. Some of you may know Lona Small Rose. I've been on her LinkedIn Live episodes where we've talked about medical laboratory advocacy and other efforts. So again, networking through LinkedIn and other avenues has helped me gain these awesome colleagues to talk about different topics. This is a podcast here called Race to Value. And in this one, I specifically was interviewed about back, you might remember the Delta variant and just COVID in general and virology in general. So this one was really a nice interview because it was about an hour long. We got to dive into some weeds of virology and some of the issues around the pandemic and misinformation. So this was a really nice opportunity here. There are others. I'm just kind of picking and choosing here some of the ones I've done. Here's a current one. I threw this in this morning before I started. This is ID Transmission, which is another platform where they talk about different infectious disease. And so here I jumped in, but this was more of a topic of my medical laboratory field, looking at shortages of workforce, clinical placement shortages for our students. Part 2 is coming out next week. And so this gave me an opportunity to discuss a big topic area in our field. It gives me a chance to speak about our profession and link to our professional organizations and all the work we're doing in certain committees. So again, it doesn't always have to be about a disease or condition. It can also be about your profession. In fact, I would say some of these are even more powerful to talk about these things. Okay, I'm coming to the point. It's one of my favorite things to talk about that can help you build your expertise, and that is an explainer article. What is an explainer article? Well, the first thing I'll say is what it's not. It is not a research article, right? So research, peer-reviewed articles are still the gold. We still need research studies. We still need accurate research studies that are looking at different hypotheses and testing those and being reproduced in the peer produced kind of literature. But we also need ways to translate that research to the public and even to other healthcare and policymakers and government. Really thick and difficult to read research articles are important for people that do that and people that want to reproduce it, and it gives people ideas in the scientific community. But it's not always the best way to go with explaining what herd immunity is to the public, right? You have to do that in a different way. That's an explainer article. And I don't know if you've ever heard of the lead. I learned about this when I was doing them. The lead is you basically flip everything you've learned about writing for research. You start with a conclusion. You start with the most important part, and that's the lead. It's the eye catcher. It's what grabs even the title, and so that it's searched for more often, right? And so that's what the lead is. And so these are tools to educate the public at the intersection of research and application. Really critical ways to do this. And I'll show you some examples. You can seek out opportunities to become a regular contributor. Again, this helps with your time and experience, but there are ways to seek out an editor, for example. So Elsevier right here, way back, this has been 10 years ago, I made a comment on an article about how to get your graduate degree done quicker. And Elsevier reached out to me and said, hey, would you like to write an article about how to do that? And so one of my first articles was about how to complete your PhD more effectively and quicker. Again, that thing's still out there. People still share it. And now I'm a contributing author for Elsevier in the clinical world. The same thing for the American Society for Microbiology, The Conversation, for Forbes. Again, I didn't build this last week. This took years of development, of writing articles, of being interviewed. And then either I offered or they sought me out and said, hey, Dr. Rohde, we'd love to add you to our team of experts to write about different topics. And I commit to 1 or 2 articles a year. Sometimes it's 1 article a month. It just depends on your comfort area for what you want to do. With an explainer article, and you've probably seen these and read them, you use a lot of subheadings. You use a lot of hot links, so there's typically not a bibliography with 18,000 references. You hot link within the sentence. You link to research and information. You want to use good, solid, reputable information from either places like WHO or articles that are peer reviewed. You can interview experts, so I can call or do a Zoom interview with an expert at a particular place and ask them if I can use their quotes. You want to link to videos, animations, and illustrations that are very helpful, kind of short ones, short clips. And these articles are only about 800 to 1,200 words long, max. You're not going to have a 5,000 word explainer article. Quick hitting, even better if it's 500, because the public wants to read something quick or see some type of short video, and it's just more effective at translating the information. Okay. These are some other links if you're interested. Again, if we had more time, I'd jump out here and show you these, but I'm a contributing author for Healthcare Hygiene Magazine. This is the space between infectious disease and how you clean the environment effectively. So I do an article every other month. I brought on one of my alumni to do the other one, so I even helped to build her career a little bit with respect to becoming an author. And so these are ways to do that. Industry. So this is Sekisui. It's an international biotech type of industrial company. And I occasionally do small articles for them about a particular diagnostic slant or my opinion on a rapid test or something like that. So you can seek out these opportunities and offer your expertise. Love the podcast, right? There are many opportunities within professional organizations now. Volunteer if you have something to say. See if they'll take you on. We have one at Texas State. Outbreak News Today has been one. I've been fortunate to talk to Robert Harriman for probably 10 years now. So there are different podcasts. You guys know about all these podcasts. And sometimes it doesn't have to be just in your field. Sometimes you might get to talk to somebody that just has kind of a general podcast and they're interested in infectious disease, and it gives you an opportunity to reach even a wider audience, right? So podcasting is great. I've never hosted one. I really don't have the time at this point, but doing your own podcast would be fun. There are plenty of my colleagues, if you're interested in that, including Lona and Tawana Wilson and Stephanie Whitehead and some others out there that are doing laboratory based podcast. You might seek their expertise on the time commitment if you're interested in starting your own podcast. I just like to do interviews with them personally. So just to share a few metrics with you as we get closer to my endpoint here, this thing is rolling forward. I mean, it's been a wonderful ride and it continues. This is actually probably a year and a half ago that I got this data from Texas State. I have done so much work during the pandemic that the university started collecting metrics for me. And so you can see this is about me and some of the magazines and some of the international and national news services that I was interviewed for. I am sharing this with you from a humble perspective. I'm still a little uncomfortable, when people act like, this is something special I've done. For me, it was always about science communication and trying to get the right information out to people. It's still something I'm passionate about. It's still something that frustrates me when I see outright falsehoods and issues in the media or in the print. And so it's something I will, probably always do, but it has been a busy time. And I'll share some of my current numbers with what's happening here, but it has been a ride. It has absolutely been a ride. Our university utilizes and I'm not promoting anything here, I'm just mentioning a couple of things that I've done, a service called The Conversation. This is a large international kind of publishing communications company that does kind of unbiased, generalized explainer articles in all fields. So economics, politics, science, whatever. And I've had the opportunity since about the beginning of the pandemic, October, November of 19, to put out articles. And you can see some of these metrics that I never would have believed would have happened. And again, some of this is being in the right place at the right time. So you can see some of these articles looking at number 5 here, just, who's doing all these COVID-19 tests and why you should care about us. This thing blew up back in 2020. about 150,000 reads, tons of geographical spread. The monkeypox article came out. I just happened to jump on that because I saw it coming. Over 250,000 reads and lots of engagement. I did a bit of article with Dr. Ryan McNamara over kind of this issue of, should you vaccinate or not, and the split in the country. That was very popular. And there's others. I've done about 14 of these articles for one particular agency over 4 years, and it's really helped me hone my ability to write explainer articles. Here's one of them from May of 2022. You can see this is a typical explainer article. Even the title, you hope, grabs the public's fancy. This is before we started using mpox. So, what is monkeypox? And then I'm going to explain what it is and what's known about this, and a little hook here about this smallpox cousin, right? So it kind of gets people's attention, like, whoa, it's related to smallpox. And then under this is where it jumps into all the subheadings and the different things we talk about: transmission, vaccine availability, geographical spread, the history of monkeypox. So this is kind of how you build a typical explainer article. Here's some of the analytics of where that thing, my reach within the conversation has gone. Again, I'm very grateful. This is very surreal for me still to think about. Things I write and speak on have traveled the globe. This is the beautiful thing about the internet and social media. The good side of it is that it allows us to reach people that may have never heard of what we do or what we're known for. So that's the great side about using social media and digital media. And so up to date, I've almost reached 1 million readers. I've sent this thing probably over 70 or 80 countries. And the beautiful thing about these types of articles is they're often called Creative Commons articles. Again, if you want some of these things later, I can talk to you offline about them, but you can ask this if you're writing articles: will this be a Creative Commons article, CC? These are articles that the publisher basically says anyone and everyone can republish this on any platform they want, as long as they give credit to the conversation. So Time Magazine could take this and publish it. ASCP could put it on their website and publish it without any cost, without anything other than giving attribution to the conversation. So again, you can see why this is a popular way to share articles without having to ask every little person, do I have permission to reproduce this? There's a listing of all my articles. There's about 13 of them. Just a few of the other types of things, again, that were really, really cool and really fun during the pandemic. I mean, as fun as things can be during a pandemic, but with respect to getting the opportunity to speak to things like Time Magazine or Men's Health. And I don't know if you guys remember, but there was a time at the early part of this where everybody was really concerned about surfaces. Can I get it from touching my nail? Can I get it from eating out in a restaurant? And so I had so many articles from just interviews about the virus, what we know about the virus, what the current research says about the virus. And going backwards, sometimes we've had to correct that. That's science, right? We didn't know that spreading on surfaces wasn't really that big of a factor. It's been more of a transmission through the air. It's more of a problematic issue. So we've kind of gone back and done some of that. Here's an article. This is actually an explainer article I did with Forbes. Again, you can see the lead here, the title, kind of tying the coronavirus pandemic to making antimicrobial resistance worse globally. And we are now seeing that in the research that it's absolutely happened. So this has been a nice foundation article that I can go back to and talk about. We tried to warn people in healthcare not to ignore AMR, and yet it kind of happened. Because of the worry about treating people with COVID. Here's the American Society for Microbiology. So I have ASM sets up a nice biography page with all of your articles. These are some that I've done. Again, I'm just sharing this with you. Hopefully this is not a promotional opportunity for my stuff. I just want to impart some examples of the types of topics that, at least in my world, that I've done. So everything from current outbreaks like with Nipah or Marburg. Here's one of the more current ones up here at the top. In April, I did kind of this advocacy piece about public health and medical laboratory professional identity. Some of you may realize that I do talks on these topics as well. So synergy, I'll write an article sometimes, and then I'll start offering it as a professional presentation, a keynote, a breakout, a webinar, so that I can tie back to it and it builds that synergy with a topic, right? So keep that synergy piece in your mind. As many times as you can utilize product, it's useful in the media and communication world. Some other interviews: U.S. News, Self Magazine, HuffPost, Martha Stewart. These are all about surfaces, about wipes. This is women's health. And this is a Facebook thing that happened. So this is just sharing a couple of things that happened during the pandemic that I consider really special for our profession and me personally. I and a couple of other professionals were asked by CNBC. This is Kate Rogers. So we were interviewed, full television piece over what we were doing and what we were dealing with supply chain issues and professional working shortages. But it also gave me a moment to advocate for the career. We need people. And so you can really use these platforms to your advantage. You can see the number of shares down here and the comments. I mean, this thing really blew up. And then one of the highlights for me personally during this opportunity was, if you guys know Dr. Tom Frieden, he's a former CDC director. He actually reached out to me during Lab Week, Medical Laboratory Professionals Week, and shared this. This was April. So this is Lab Week. And this is, I think, 2021, 22. And this, he took the article that I'd written for the conversation that I shared with you earlier, and he shared it. And, this was a pretty big deal for me. And I think for the profession, because it gave me an opportunity to say, hey, look, even the director of the Centers for Disease Control understands how critical we are to healthcare and what we provide to patient care and patient safety. So that was really, really impactful. A YouTube channel. Again, I'm getting close on time here, so just a few more slides, but YouTube channels are not that difficult to build. If you're familiar with social media, and basically you set up a profile and you start adding videos. One quick tip, if you're going to do this, think about what you want to put on your little bio right here. So if you go to my site, you can see what I write about, that it's a site for collection of research, teaching, and service within my expertise. Try to find some good pictures of yourself, some professional pictures. And then the other tip here is that when you do a conversation, when you do an interview, when you do a talk, ask for permission if you can have a copy of the video, and ask if you can share it on your YouTube channel, because sometimes you need permission. And then you can start putting up interviews and webinars and professional talks, and you build a collection that you can utilize and amplify. The bio. Do not underestimate your bio. Again, I'm sharing this with you just because it's a way to promote and leverage what you've done as a subject matter expert, so that when they ask you, almost all media and almost all professional organizations will ask you, hey, can you shoot me a short bio of what you've done, or your website, your LinkedIn profile? You have a quick, short document that you can just attach to an email and fire to them. So don't underestimate building a bio, even if it's a paragraph or two. That's really all you need. And try to hit the highlights, what you do, your credentials, maybe your education, maybe some of your awards, if that's appropriate, and other metrics if you have them, and then share that so that people can utilize that when they introduce you, so forth. Again, building synergy with what you do. So there is a way to make a difference as a subject matter expert. As I kind of wrap up here, do not forget that you are all experts. You have something to share if you're working in the field of the medical laboratory profession or some tangent of that area in healthcare. You are an expert on a multitude of subjects, whether it's stewardship, resistance, pathogen interaction with the environment. I'm picking on myself here. Diagnostic testing, susceptibility testing. What does that mean to the public when you say, how do you make sure a bacteria is susceptible to a certain antibiotic? people don't know these answers. They don't know how that's done. And so you can kind of talk that in a kind of a common language. Everything that's in our career, credential-wise and degree-wise, can do this, whether you're a DCLS or an MLT. You can do this as a phlebotomist. You can do this as a specialist. It doesn't matter. Just find your lane and stay in it. Those decisions you make every day impact clinicians' selection and interpretation of tests, ultimately influencing patient care. Remember some of those primary statements that we like to use professionally. About 75% of everything we do, doctors and other healthcare professionals use in their decisions about patient health and care from cradle to grave. It's probably the most biggest metric that physicians use in healthcare, laboratory testing. You can leverage that as a science communicator, definitely within the public, but also within your colleagues and others you know, because you know this stuff better than most people. And that last thing is so important. If you don't own it and find your lane to share it, then someone else will, right? And that's been another big lesson. Someone else will, and it may not be the correct information. And it's really hard to put those horses back in the barn when that misinformation gets out there. You've seen it. You know how difficult it is. That's a different talk. That's a different presentation to kind of dealing with misinformation in social media and the media. Maybe that's a future webinar, but those are things that can be very difficult to handle. Some of the resources available that I've used here in my bibliography, all very useful. Many of these are colleagues or professional organizations or publishers that have helped me build my ability to communicate. I'm learning every day how to do this better. So I'm trying to continue to be an expert in how to share this information. So I want to thank you. Here's some of my resources. You can find me online in different ways. I primarily use LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook is my primary social media channels at this point. So I want to thank LabVine, and I want to thank each of you for attending. And I'm available if Victoria has the time to answer some questions.
Yes, Dr. Rodney, I think we are a bit over time, but anyone who is able to speak, we do appreciate it if you can just stay behind, have your questions answered. We currently have 8 questions in the Q&A section, but before that, I just want to, in case people do leave, I just want to sincerely thank you, Dr. Rodney, for presenting with us. We are very excited. We've learned a lot, and we already have a lot of new topics that we'd like to hear from you. And thank you to all the attendees for attending, taking the time to listen to Dr. Rodney, and we hope you learned a lot of valuable things. And before you sign out, there's also evaluation at the end of this webinar. So if you could please kindly complete that, we would appreciate it. So Rodney, we can go over to questions. You can open the Q&A section and then read out the ones that you do find relevant and would like to answer.
Sure, let me take a peek at some of these. Let's see. So it says, do you think people need a PhD to be a subject matter expert? This is from Sarah. Is people working in labs sometimes do not have the opportunity or funds to do that? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Some of the most intelligent, smart expertise that I've met are individuals that are the associate's level, the bachelor's degree level, the master's degree level. You don't have to have that PhD. It certainly gives you the credential of being perceived, maybe at a terminal degree, just like a physician with an MD may be perceived that way. But that doesn't mean you can't find experts at all levels. I build them with my students who graduate. I start mentoring them into how to write articles, into how to get to be a subject matter expert. So absolutely not. It certainly doesn't hurt to get more education, more credentials, but it's not the end all to be all. Let's see. Let me look through some of these. Mm-hmm. One here that says, this is anonymous, which one of your educational areas would you say gave you more experience in your expertise? It's really a double answer for me, because I'm going to say for the first half of my career, the first 10 to 15 years, it was my bachelor's and master's in the hard core sciences of microbiology and virology. And remember, I mentioned I did a master's degree in virology. So I did a wet lab research project with poliovirus and antiviral research. that was really informative to me. It really gave me the background to answer questions about viruses. I mean, really the kind of getting into the weeds of the research that was going on. But then later, like now, so the last 10 years of my career, since about 2005 forward, it's really been more about my experience as an educator in teaching and speaking. And my PhD was more focused on science communication and public health. So it's really kind of a divergence for me, but I use them both. And that's really what I was speaking to with respect to a hybrid kind of experience. If you can get multiple experiences like that, it can be very helpful. Let's see, there's a question here about, oh, here's a good one maybe. What institutional permissions would be necessary from an employer while putting up content? Is it necessary to obtain them before venturing into these avenues? So the answer here is the all-important and maybe not happy answer of it depends. It kind of depends on your employer. So it is really important that if you are working for a hospital or a health agency, that if you're speaking as a Mayo Clinic employee, then you probably better ask for permission if you're going to put your title and your place of employment and you're speaking as a Mayo Clinic scientist, right? If you're doing it as a personal thing, then it's not as important, but I still do it. I just think it's good courtesy to make sure your university, your hospital knows that you are working in these areas. Once you build that trust, it becomes less of an issue. But early on, I think it's a good professional courtesy and practice to make sure you understand this. Now, here's one other tip here. Most professional organizations and entities like a hospital or an agency actually have social media policies. It's important that you find that or ask for it and you look through it and understand it. Because there may be some things like, for example, if you write an article representing something in your college or something like that, you may actually have to get that sent up the chain and approved before you can, release it. And that's part of being an employee. If you've produced that work at your institution, they've helped you, they've helped you with your equipment, your computer, everything you've used. You're using that entity to produce that work, then you need to make sure it's okay before you send it out. So that's just a professional courtesy. Great question. It's a great reminder about the ethics and being smart as a social media user, but even other things. Even if you're going to be interviewed by a television, I always tell my media market, hey, KXAN in Austin is asking me to talk about malaria that has popped up in South Texas this month. And I just give them a heads up so that they know I'm doing that. It's just good professional courtesy. Let's see. A lot of these look like they're asking about for advice for degrees and things like that. So I'm going to kind of leave those offline. I mean, those are things, there's always opportunities to work on your master's degree or a DCLS or a PhD. The one piece of advice I might give there for anyone listening is I think it's really important to, before you jump right into a graduate degree of any kind, to make sure you take some time to understand what you're passionate about and interested in. Graduate degrees are not easy. They're also not cheap. They cost money many times. So you don't want to just say, you know what, I'm going to get a PhD in quantum physics because it looks cool on TV. That's probably not the best decision. I mean, you want to interview people. You want to visit the different programs, whether it's by virtual visits or in person. Go read some articles from different areas that are publishing them out of a certain lab at a university. Get to know what they're doing and find out, you really love that, because you're going to be working on that for 5 to 7 years for a PhD. You got to kind of like what you're doing or you will be miserable. So like anything in life, find what you're passionate about before you jump into it and spend all that money and time.
Definitely. Completely agree with that one.
Yeah. I don't know if there's anything in the chat, Victoria. I'll take a quick peek.
A lot of thank yous. So your message about what your mom told you really came through, which is very nice. Besides that, we just had at the beginning just a few comments about what people think the meaning of SME is. So I don't know if you would like to go through it. You will get it in your report as well, but I think it was very aligned with your presentation as well.
Yeah, it looks like most of them are commenting on what they thought about an SME was. So yeah, and those all look right to me. I mean, basically it's whatever area you're in and making sure you have the credentials and the experience to speak, informatively and intelligently about something with respect to current information.
Definitely. Thank you, Dr. Rodney. I think you have addressed everything, and we really, really appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Thank you, Victoria, and thank your team. I really appreciate it, and hopefully we'll be doing this again soon.
Yes, definitely. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Okay. Bye.